Welcome to What's That Pen? My name is Amanda Arneill, and today we are doing a pen set that has been requested many times. And I'm going to tell you that not every pen that's requested is easily available over here in North America. So from now on, I'm going to be probably sticking to ones that are much easier for me to get because, well, these are about $3.50 if you change it into American dollars. If you're in India, over here, they were $40 to get, which is a lot. So this is primarily for the people who requested this because that means that they're about $2.90 per pen because there are 14 in this pack. Now, with the number of requests, my hopes are very high for these pens. Let's dive into the DOMS brush pen comprehensive pen review. This pack of pens comes with 14 different colors, 2 of those being the silver and gold shades, and we'll see how well those work for metallics. It's a water-based marker, and it also says that it can be used for watercolor blending and painting, so we will test that out as well. Not sure as to the acid-free-ishness of these, but let's dive in and test them out for their brush pen use. So taking a look at oh, they mean it with the lid, that's great. Taking a look at the nib, it has a felt brush nib and it's very, very long. So that is probably why they say that these are a super soft tip. So it's a felt nib and a brush tip. Remember that felt tips often fray more easily than the nylon nib, but you don't really know how much they fray until you use them for a while. And because this is the very first time that I've opened these pens, I am not sure as to the fray over time. Now, one thing with it being such a soft brush nib is that sometimes being able to feel your pen on those upstrokes can be difficult. And while you can achieve really thin upstrokes with this, when it's thin like that, you can't actually feel the pen against the paper. So don't be nervous about making your upstrokes a little bit thicker, and that way you can feel the texture of the paper on the very tip of your pen, which means that you will have more consistent upstrokes over time. Now, looking at the strokes themselves, because it is so soft, there is some wiggling on the sides of the pen. And sometimes that is 100% the user, which I get, but pens that do have that softer tip are more likely to show those user errors. So unless your hand is perfectly still and you can even go perform surgery after your lettering, you're probably gonna have a few of those wiggle and wobbles. Let's look at the thick and thin lines. So it does get quite a thick line. And that thin line, we already talked about that it can't be as thin as possible if you want to have a nice consistent thin line. But compared to the size of the thick line, there's still really nice contrast between the two. Let's look at Nib Rebound next, which means that pushing on one side of the pen and then looking at the pen, you can see it's very slightly flexed to that side, but not much at all. So that Nib Rebound is actually quite good. And this color, gorgeous. Now for writing size, because that downstroke is so large and also because your upstrokes are pretty large if you want to be able to feel the paper underneath, our writing size with these would also need to be quite large. I have a sense of what the juiciness is going to be, and that is quite juicy from doing the Nib Rebound. Coloring in here and then smudging, there's quite a bit of smudge, and that's because these are not designed to be just a lettering pen where you would hope for that quick dry. Instead, they are designed to have that watercolor effect where you can use it with a paintbrush and water and do blending, which means that having that juiciness and the ability to play with that ink is an important thing for a water brush pen. However, it is still a really wet pen, which means that if you're a lefty, these ones will be a little bit more difficult for you. Let's look at the ease of transition. So how easy is it to go from your upstroke to a downstroke? And it is not easy because the pen nib actually tends to, there it goes, it changes direction. So while you might be pushing This way, when you go into that curve, the pen nib is still in front, still in front, still in front, and then at one point it ends up flipping in behind. And that is where you will get these sorts of jiggles as the pen nib itself is flipping. That would make this not your best choice for lettering. So on a scale of stay away, nay, okay, or yay, I would say that these ones are probably a stay away for lettering. Oh, this looks like a happy face. Yay. Stay away for lettering, but let's take these over onto some watercolor paper and see what they're like when we do watercolors. Also, that will allow us to have a larger size space to do some of these transitions, which might make them slightly easier. Before I test these on watercolor paper, the only paintbrush I could currently find was one of my children's ones, and it has unfinished wood, which makes me gag. So if you wonder why I'm using a paintbrush that has saran wrap around it, it's so that we don't spend the rest of the video with me gagging. There we go, it's perfect. All right, we have a few tests that we like to do when we are testing out the who am I? I'm not royal. There are a few tests that I like to do when I am looking at watercolor brush pens. And the first one is to see how well they blend out. So I have student grade paper and then I have artist grade paper. And let's see how well a blend goes on both. Putting down a little bit of paint, and we'll just activate that watercolor with a little bit of water and blend it down. So this is the student grade paper and a really junky paintbrush of my children's, but we're getting quite a nice blend even on the student grade. Now, if it works well on student grade, it's probably going to be nice on the artist, but we always like to test. And activating it by adding some water, and then we'll blend it down, pulling some paint off until we get down to the bottom. And that is a gorgeous blend happening there. It was definitely easier to do it on the artist grade paper, which is what you would expect. But student grade still has quite a nice blend going there. One thing that I do want to test is to see if there is ever a mark with some of these darker colors in the blend, because sometimes you can start the paint and you see where the color was first drawn on with the marker. Here it looks though like the edges are blending out pretty well, even with these darker colors. One other one to try will be this. Ooh, gorgeous color. They really should advertise this better on the cap. It's a nice color. Blend that one down, and that one does seem to leave a mark between where it was drawn on the page and then the blend that happens. There are sometimes in a set markers that will leave more of a mark, get it? Where they were first drawn and then where the blend tried to happen. Let's try black. And the black has some blend to it. Oh, whoops, crazy water. The black has the ability to blend. It doesn't have as harsh a line as the pink one did. Just for interest's sake, let's try the other pink and see if that also has a line. And I'm doing this pretty quickly where the water is getting added to it and then it's getting blended out. So sometimes if you leave it for quite a while, that marker will be stuck onto the page, but then sometimes you have certain colors that just get stuck no matter what. Let's try those sticky colors on the artist grade paper and see if there's any difference. First the fuchsia, activating it and then pulling it down. And there is still a bit of a mark, but it does seem to blend a little bit more softly. And now the pink, which is still just getting stuck right where it was drawn with the marker. If you have a set of colors where that happens, you're going to want to either add more color after the page has already been wetted, or get lots of water on there and then tap your color in to try to cover up some of that blending area. So this takes a lot more playing with the marker than just drawing it on and being able to blend, but you can get still some nice effects even if the marker that you have does give you those hard lines. So keep that in mind, not just for this marker, but for any other watercolor markers that you have. If right away you end up with that line that's there, once the page is wet, you can always go back and add a little bit more color to the wet area to try to blend out that hard line. Let's take a look too at the silver and gold pens just to see how silvery or gold they are. So that was the silver pen, and now for the gold test. So the gold is more of a green base gold, and often the metallic pens don't blend. They're just not super designed for that. We are getting a bit of a blend definitely with the silver. The gold you can still play with as well. So that's a really nice characteristic of this gold and silver marker, that it still does act like a watercolor and you can play around with the color afterwards. Let's look at a letter. Now for this, I am going to use the art paper, not just because it's the only place with space left, but because that does give you the best blends possible. So let's give these a fighting chance. We'll use red and orange because we haven't used them anywhere else. And first we will test for how well we can blend the colors together. So we'll do some red on the top and orange on the bottom and see if we can bring these two colors together. Again, I am using the world's worst paintbrush, but you can still activate the color with any paintbrush that you have and pull it in together. Now, when they end up touching, we get quite a nice seamless blend. And I would say that that is a really nice way to blend it. Now let's see if we can pick color up. So I'll just do a line of color, and in the center, if we get it wet, you should be able then to play around with the color. And to create depth within your letter, it can be really nice to pick up some of the color off the page. So you do that by having a mostly dry paintbrush, so it's been dipped in the water and there's not extra water on your paintbrush, and then just pulling along the area of color. And we're getting quite a bit of color lifted off, considering how dark that started, so that you can have that glowing area in the center with those dark lines on the outside to give real depth to your watercolor. This is also nice if you make a mistake somewhere and want to lift some of the color up to make it a lighter version of that color. Let's see how we can lift up in this blend here. And again, you just activate it with a damp paintbrush, and then you can start to lift the color up and just wipe the extra off onto a clean paper towel or cloth. Doing this in a blend can also really serve to highlight the blend that's going on there. So now you see the red moving into pink, moving into light orange, and then dark orange. And this is a gorgeous effect that you can get with these pens. And I think that a lot of that is because so much pigment is put down onto the page, but it's still malleable. So you can still play with it afterwards, lifting it up, blending it together, and moving it around the page. That being said, it's definitely better for some colors than others. As this pink has dried too, you see that it's separated into different tones. So here on the student grade paper, we end up with a gray base to the pink and a pink base to the black. And here we have a little bit of a halo of yellow that has happened around the pink. That being said, the fuchsia and the blue are still both really vibrant, and the orange and red are easy to play with. That means that some of these colors will be able to blend more easily than others. So keep that in mind when you are planning how you will use them. You always want to do test swatches onto the watercolor paper that you're going to be using. Whatever you're going to use, you always want to test first with your pens just to check how they blend and how you'll be able to lift them up off the page later, because that will inform the designs that you can create. I would say after playing around with the DOMS brush pens that if they are an affordable choice for you where you are, they would be a really nice pen for doing watercolor. I would not suggest them for a primary lettering pen because of how difficult the transitions can be, and also how you can't feel the traction or the texture of the paper on your upstrokes. That means that it's actually a more difficult pen to use and a more difficult pen to control. You'll have a lot more variety in your upstrokes, they won't all be consistent, and you'll have a lot more variety in your downstrokes, which is why this would probably be better for use as a watercolor pen versus a lettering pen. I would absolutely say that if you are new to lettering, this is not a good pen to use because of those very factors. You're not going to have your consistent upstrokes and downstrokes, and that will be super frustrating for you. And you want to make sure you're starting off on the strongest foot possible, which means that you want to use a pen that will support you as a beginner. The colors of this set, though, are incredibly saturated and vibrant. And because of that and the ability to blend and also lift the color, they will be fun to play with for watercolor painting or watercolor lettering. Remember, if you are using them, your writing size is going to have to be quite large, which can make your transitions potentially a little bit easier, but you're probably going to have to go back and touch up some of those transitions to make your piece look as perfect as you want it to be. Thank you so much to everyone who asked for the test of the DOMS brush pens. I hope that this showed you a little bit more about what they're like outside of the box and the different uses that you can use them for. Do keep in mind, though, that some pens are available where you are and different pens are available where I am. So sometimes it's hard, not just for me to get my hands on them, hence the long delay, but also for me to be able to tell you exactly which pen and paper combinations are going to work for you. Make sure that you always test them out on the paper that you're going to use, and if in doubt, do not use it on that paper. If you're thinking this might ruin my pen, you know what? That niggle inside is telling you it probably is going to. I always say to myself that if I'm thinking I don't know if I should use this, don't is actually do not put together. So if you are unsure, if you're thinking I don't know, do not. Always err on the side of caution to make sure that your pens, especially if they cost $40 to get them all the way to you, last as long as they possibly can. Until next time, happy lettering.